I have now seen the Super Mario Bros. Movie 8 times. I'm just a bit of a fan, not like I'm wearing clothing based around it or anything. Oh. But this time I saw it in Japanese, and no, I didn't have to fly all the way to Japan for it, because as it turns out, even though it just opened in Japan, Nintendo also, or Illumination rather, also opened the Japanese version in limited locations in North America. And thankfully one of them is not far from me, so I decided to go check it out and see if there's anything different about it, especially given the fact that Miyamoto himself said that Nintendo wrote the Japanese version of the script. So that got me thinking, you know, maybe they changed something else about this movie, maybe there are some differences here, and so I went to go find out. I even brought my Mario notebook, my Mario movie notebook here, and took notes, which, hey, look, let's see if we can read my chicken scratch here. Probably not. Sneak peek of my terrible handwriting in the dark. In any case, spoiler alert, it's by and large the same movie, but there are some interesting details here that I want to touch on. Now, there's also the fact that I can't understand Japanese. I know, shocking, right? And not only that, the movie was not subtitled either, unfortunately, meaning I could only go off of what I could understand or what I remembered from the English version, which is most of it, but I've seen it 7 other times. But with that being said, there are still some interesting differences here, interesting changes in a grander sense, even if, again, the movie is by and large the same. So let's get right into it, and right off the bat, once again, this is basically the exact same movie, only now in Japanese, with a new voice cast, with almost everything else being the same. That means every single frame rendered from a computer, everything you've seen from the ads, from seeing the English version of the movie, it's all the same. It is completely unchanged. I don't think there's a single difference here, and that includes the lip syncing too. So they didn't re-sync it to the localized dubbing. Instead, it will be off at points. Now they did a great job mostly matching it, but of course, as with any dub, you will notice it's off at you know, here and there, just because again they didn't re-render anything. So what this means is Mario's still playing an NES instead of what you might expect to be a Famicom, based on it again being being a Japanese version. All the on-screen text is still in English, so all the like little ticker on the news or any background details like storefronts, that's again all in English. So once again, nothing like that was rendered from a computer was changed at all in this movie. And that also includes the fact that there are no extended scenes. I know some people were hoping that they would add that cheap scene that was cut from the commercial back in. It's gone still. It's not back. There's not an extended frame here that I could tell. It's the exact same movie. Again, minus any possible script changes and a few minor details I'm going to touch on. That also extends to the fact that the music is also the same. Basically, every original piece of music, whether it's based on Mario or composed for the movie, or even all the licensed tracks, they are basically all identical. So that means that songs like Holding Out for a Hero, Take On Me, Thunderstruck, and everything else, they're all back. They're all exact as you remember from the English version, and in English as well. I know some people were hoping the Mario Kart scene would use the unused music that was cut from the movie and replaced with Take On Me. I'm sorry to say that is still here, even though I actually think that's a great song choice. So all the licensed tracks are back. They're still in English as well. Not a single difference there, except for one difference. I'm gonna say, okay, completely undermine myself. But there is one change if you consider it a licensed track, being the Super Mario Brothers rap song from the Super Mario Brothers Super Show, which is used in the Mario Brothers plumbing ad, because that actually was localized to be in Japanese this time, using Japanese voice actors, and that was kind of cool to see. It ties into the plot, so it makes sense why they actually had to redo that one. Again, otherwise every licensed song is the same. Even the DK rap is back, still in English, and of course Grant Kirkhope is still sadly uncredited in the credits. So justice for Grant Kirkhope, darn it. With that being said, there are a couple other points related to the music I want to point out. One is the fact that Toad has a little ditty at some point when he rejoins Mario and Peach on their adventure, and he still sings it in the exact same way, or rather, it's re-recorded but in the exact same way. So it was redone by the new voice actor, but he says it in the exact same way as the original Toad from the English version, and it's almost identical. Next, though, of course, is a big thing we have to touch on, being Peaches, Bowser's famous song for this movie, which I've heard now a couple of people playing it in public on their, on their car radio, which is amazing. This, of course, was re-recorded to be in Japanese as well. Bowser still says the word peach, but this time, interestingly, he doesn't say peaches, he says peachy. So I don't know if it's because of how plurals work in Japan, or if they just changed it a little bit for the, localized release. I'm sure someone who knows Japanese more than me can better explain why that was changed. But in any case, he says peachy, or so it sounds like, rather than peaches. Otherwise, the song sounds very similar, including the voice actor himself, which sounds close to Jack Black, not exactly like Jack Black. But yeah. Speaking of the voice cast, let's touch on that real quick, because by and large, not even by and large, across the board, they did great. They all sound, if not very similar to the original English cast, of course, besides being in Japanese. They sound like a great rendition of the character. Really, most of them sound very close to, again, what they were aiming for with the movie. I noticed Mario Peach sounded just a little bit deeper than I was used to from the movie, but you get used to that quick enough, just as we got used to Chris Pratt being deeper than, you know, Charles Martinet's Mario. So yeah, I thought the voices were great across the board. I did notice Cranky was probably the most different to what I remember from the English version, which some might consider an improvement. I've gotten so used to the English version now that even though I had an issue with them before, I'm totally cool with it at this point. In any case, again, it's all great. It all sounded fine. Although I will say, DK, it's weird hearing DK's laugh not being Seth Rogen's laugh, because they redubbed the laughing scenes too, and it's just a normal laugh now, from what I could tell, and not the Seth Rogen one. And you know what? Some people may consider that an improvement. It actually bothered me. I actually thought Seth Rogen's laugh was used great. I think in only 2 scenes, both of which I felt were a little less for lacking it. There is one other major difference too I noticed, and that's with the Sniffet. Now, the Sniffet talking at all, of course, still blows my mind in the English version, hearing that, and I loved his voice in the English version. In the Japanese one, it's still good, but they gave it more of a metallic sounding, more of a almost robotic sounding effect to it, which again, I'm sure is fine. It did stand out to me a little bit, sounded a little bit more, you know, unnatural, and that kind of like took me out of it just briefly, but by and large, again, it's very similar to the original version. There is one other big thing about the voice work I have to point out, specifically about the voices, and that's the fact that Charles Martinet is still in the movie. Kind of. He still voices Jumpman, the guy who looks like, you know, the original Mario who's playing the Jumpman arcade game based on Donkey Kong in the Punch-Out Pizzeria. And he still sounds the exact same. They didn't redo the lines or anything there. It's the exact same voice clips from the English version, and that's awesome. It makes sense that he's representing the original Mario. But what did change is Charles Martinet's other character, which was literally Mario's dad in the movie. That is no longer voiced by Charles Martinet. It's now a native Japanese speaker, which, you know, makes complete sense because I imagine Charles Martinet probably doesn't speak much Japanese. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But it does take away a little bit from the character in a meta sense, because it was so cool having Mario's dad literally give him his seal of approval at the end. You're giving Chris Pratt's Mario like that level of approval, right? So that is a level that's a little bit lost in the Japanese version, for better or worse. Especially because, or for worse, straight up. Especially because I know Charles Martinet did voice that character in some other regions, I think like Spanish for instance, so it's a little bit of a bummer that the Japanese do miss out on that. Okay, let's move on to what script changes I did notice, which again, I don't speak Japanese, so I'm not able to speak to any larger points that they may have changed, but based on the fact that the animations didn't change and how similar some of the things I could tell were, I doubt that they changed much. It by and large, you know, seemed like it's probably just a very accurate localized version of the script. Maybe I'm wrong. I have a friend singing in Japanese tomorrow who actually does know Japanese, so if anything changes on that front, I'll report back either in a pinned comment or in the description or with an updated video perhaps. But let's get to the script changes that I did notice. And that is, or rather, maybe not even changes, just interesting details about it. And that's the fact that a lot of it, maybe not a lot of it, some of it is still in English. Like a lot of Mario's little yelps, like Mamma Mia or Woohoo, that's still in English. It is re-recorded by the Japanese voice actor, but it's recognizably in English still. I'm including, you know, like when Mario says Mamma Mia when he's flipping over Francis the dog, or when he's flipping over, flipping over the Bomber Bill as well. He also says princess in slow motion during the slow motion scene in the exact same way. And also he says, it's a me, very similar, again in English, very similar to the English version when he gets punched up by Donkey Kong. In addition, some of the proper nouns are also in English, like the Blue Toad, who's basically the replacement for Toadsworth. He still says superstar. I think Bowser says that as well himself. And maybe a handful of other characters. And then also, most interestingly to me, is the leader of the Koopa Troop, besides Bowser, the guy with the blue shell. He literally says blue shell during the Rainbow Road sequence, just as he does in English. And I thought they might change that, just given how anal, for lack of a better word, Nintendo is about calling it Spiky Shell whenever they can. So they kept it as blue shell in English, and I appreciated that. Yeah, and besides that, oh, and there was one other point I wanted to touch on. Again, even though I can't understand most of it, I did notice that they replaced Mario's hello that he says to a couple of characters like the the Bramble early into the Mushroom Kingdom, and also the Bomber Bill with Domo, which apparently is a Japanese way of greeting someone that you're not quite sure how to greet, and that is a seemingly absolutely perfect way of replacing hello. The uncertain way which Mario said it in the English version seems like it was replicated perfectly from what I can tell in Japanese. Again, not a native speaker, maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like a smart replacement based on what I could tell. So that was cute, I like that. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, I've mentioned Bowser, of course, and Bowser is known as Koopa here, just as he is in the game. So every replacement of Bowser is replaced with Koopa. Something else I noticed is that DK, I don't think I mentioned this yet, DK during the Mario Kart sequence in the English version whispers, "I hate you." In the Japanese version, I don't know exactly what he says, probably something to that effect, but it no longer sounds like he's whispering it. So maybe they changed what he said to warrant not whispering it. It felt to me like it may have lost a little something, but again, without actually knowing what he said, it may be totally fine, especially if you hadn't seen the English version. It just felt to me, having seen it 7 times, like, oh, he whispered that there, yeah, it doesn't sound like he's whispering it here. A couple other small details, which may or may not matter that much. I noticed that Francis the dog, it sounded like the owner called him Yoshi, or it's some name with Yoshi in it, which I believe isn't too uncommon in Japan. So I don't know if that was a reference to Yoshi, or maybe just a common Japanese name used for the dog. Secondly, though, is that Bowser in the English version at one point mentions wedding bells, whereas in the Japanese version he literally, I forget exactly now, but he basically sings what sounds like the wedding song briefly, or the musical equivalent of wedding bells, if that makes sense. He basically makes it, like the sound wedding bells would make, I think. Again, I don't remember exactly, but I thought that was interesting, that he doesn't say it, he instead makes the sound of it, either the music or the bells themselves, I can't fully remember. Okay, so I think that covers most of it, but there is one big change that I forget if I teased early on, but there is one visual change I want to touch on here, because again, even though every scene rendered from a computer didn't change, they did add something visually to the movie that I thought was interesting, because even though this was uncaptioned in English, there were Japanese captions that appeared at 3 points in the movie. Specifically, during the antique store portion, when Mario's going through the Mushroom Kingdom, when the Toad explains that you can blow into the cartridge. Then again, as Mario's entering the castle, talking, just as he's talking to the 2 guards outside the castle, and they make the another castle joke, which they do again in English. Then finally, when there's a newspaper at the end saying they saved Brooklyn. So the things that appeared on screen were captioned again in Japanese. I couldn't read it, but it sounded like, or it seemed to me like they were explaining the joke, I'm guessing. Like the another castle reference, which I'm assuming wasn't exactly what they said in Japanese, which was based on the NES version of the game. I don't know what they said in Japanese, but I'm guessing that they had to maybe explain it on screen. So I thought that was a little weird, because in the English version there's not a single title that appears on screen. Yet here we had 3 of them. Again, they appear briefly, I think in the center of the screen even, being based on Japanese characters. So I thought that was interesting that they seemingly did so to keep the spirit of what was the original English script, but they had to explain it in a way so it made sense. Again, that's based on my interpretation. I could have it wrong, but I couldn't literally read it. But yeah, there you go. Then that is pretty much it. The only other minor difference is in the credits, where the initial part of the credits, where they have the cool rendered visuals and they have the names of the voice actors. The voice actors were redone to have the Japanese voice actors instead. So instead of like Chris Pratt, you'd see the Japanese voice actor for Mario. However, once you get to the main credits portion, the last portion that we'd recognize from the English version, where it's just white text and black scrolling by, that's still the exact same as the English version, from what I could tell. So which means for Mario, you have it listing Chris Pratt, which I thought that was interesting, and Seth Rogen for DK, and so on and so forth. So they kept that the exact same. I assume to keep the timing for the music, maybe, I don't know. But then at the very end, as you may have seen on like streaming services, after the English credits go by, even after the Yoshi post-credit scene, which of course is identical, they have a more in-depth version of the Japanese credits, which properly credits, as far as I can tell, everyone involved with the Japanese localization. So yeah, there's no other scenes beyond that or anything. It's just like the Japanese credits. So, with all that being said, again, overall, not a whole lot has changed, based from what I could tell. Again, if there were any major script changes, I can't speak to them, but I may follow up if I find anything more from my Japanese-speaking friend, who again is seeing it tomorrow. So, that being said, would I recommend seeing the Japanese version? Yes and no. If you can speak Japanese, if you can understand Japanese, sure, why not? It's a fun way of seeing the movie that seems extremely faithful from what I can tell to the English version. Again, I don't fully know how well everything localizes over, but it seems like they did as good a job as possible. And the voice acting, again, is great across the board. And even the lip syncing, even though it's not perfect as the English version because it was literally animated to that, it's pretty close and it doesn't really stand out that much being off. If you don't speak English, don't waste your time. It's still fun, it's still pretty, but you're not gonna understand anything at all going on. And it did, even though I knew what was happening, it still took me out of the movie a little bit. It still detracted from the experience compared to the English one. This is kind of obvious, of course, but if you're interested in the novelty, it is interesting on that level. But it's not interesting enough to go see it. There aren't any meaningful changes here that I would recommend seeing it now that you've seen this video. So there we go, everyone. That is my look at the Japanese version of the movie. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this was informative at all. And again, I'll follow up either in a comment or a follow-up video if there's any significant changes in the script from what I hear from my friend who can speak Japanese. So with that, everyone, thank you for watching. Let us know in the comments what you thought of this, and we'll catch you later. Maybe at a Mario movie screening, because I just can't get enough of that movie. Not in Japanese, though, in English. Alright, everyone, we'll catch you later. Bye.